Hi, we're going to get started now. Welcome everyone. My name is Grace Finlan Golden and I'm with Foothold Technology. Today's webinar is Advocating for an Inclusive Workforce, a roundtable about supported employment. I'd like to start by extending a big thanks to Esme, Grant Grewal of ANCOR, Sarah Myerscough-Mueller of IARF, and Pat Dowse of New York Alliance for working with Foothold's David Bucciferro on today's webinar. We have a lot of information to get through today, but we'd like to answer as many questions as possible. So if you have a question at any point during the presentation, please let our speakers know by sending a chat message through the Q&A feature on your screen. I'll now turn it over to Esme, Sarah, Pat, and David.
Thanks, everybody. Welcome. Very pleased that you could all make it today. This is an especially personal topic for me, and I know for many of you as well. For many years, I worked as a director of vocational services for the state of New York, and it was always a struggle to try to get more and more people employed, and I'm really hoping that this discussion and others that are going on are really going to help to turn that table so that employment becomes just a normal, natural thing for everyone. And that's something that's so difficult for a lot of people to achieve. I'd like to say thank you to Esme, Sarah, and Pat for joining me. I'm going to start by asking a few questions, and really do invite you to ask questions in the chat box, and we will ask our panelists those questions as they come through. So I'm going to start with a question for each of them, and I'll start with Esme. From your perspective, could you sort of describe the state of employment for persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities?
Sure. Hi, David. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I sure can, Esme.
Great.
Thank you for joining.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, so the state of employment for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. You know, I think this has been a really interesting week in Washington. I'm actually calling from the Department of Health and Human Services right now, so I'm right in the center of Washington. And we've been doing a lot of reflection with President George H.W. Bush's passing, and really his impact on signing the Americans with Disabilities Act. And one of the key things that we really looked at following the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act was employment. Employment was a huge piece of that. It was a huge title of that big civil rights legislation. But interestingly, I think while we've made a lot of architectural and other accessibility strides because of the ADA, employment has really been one that has proven to be one of the greatest challenges. So we're still at these really high levels of unemployment. If you look at some of the latest figures from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which falls under the Department of Labor, you know, we're looking at overall people with disabilities of 18%, employment. Just really, really terrible numbers. And those unfortunately get worse when you look at intellectual and developmental disability. So I think while we can, and we'll discuss on this call today, this webinar today, some of the strides that have been made and some of the really, really great examples that I think we can really enlarge to see a greater impact. I think unfortunately we're still at this moment in time where we haven't lived up yet to the goals of the ADA and the employment goals that we'd love to see for people with Disabilities Act. And I should say under the ADA and also under the even older piece of legislation, the DD Act. So I think we've got a ways to go, but that's why these conversations are so important.
Thanks, Esme. Sarah, could you share from IRS perspective some of your feelings?
Sure, and some of it will probably be a little bit of a repeat of what Esme said, but I am sort of hopeful. I feel like we are at a really good time, at least, in Illinois, around employment. We have a lot of things kind of happening on an administrative, higher level side of things that I think aren't just looking at high level kinds of changes and policy and legislative like changes, but things that actually will, not just could, but will trickle down and really make change at a local level, really get providers thinking about employment, individuals thinking about employment, businesses thinking about employment, all for people with disabilities. So I'm sort of at a stage of being maybe overly, but optimistic about where we are in Illinois. And I'll get into more details later in the webinar, but I do think we're at a really good time to make change and really do some exciting things.
Thanks. Pat, could you give us a little thought on your perspective of where the state of employment is?
In our country, I think we still have a lot of work to do. In the state of New York, we still have a lot of work to do. We all have a lot of work to do, and that's part of why we're still in this job. Wouldn't it be neat to get to some point when we wouldn't have to have one of these kind of conversations? That's certainly one of my career goals. But I think that's the magic word, is the word career. So often in the world of supporting individuals who identify as someone with a disability, we seek a job. We don't seek a life. We don't think about careers. And all of the work that is before us in laws and new laws starts to now speak about the world of career development and discovery, and working towards a future and not just a one-shot. Even our own rules around supported employment was, it typically and still is written as a place and train model versus looking at true career development. And I think one of the things that New York is striving for as an employment first state is to identify the mistakes that we've made, admit to them, and look for ways to build a pathway from school to adulthood that includes career and exploration opportunities that never before were anticipated as part of a life plan for an individual with developmental disabilities or any other challenges to their world of work. So that's what we're looking at in New York, is how to create career plans now. So.
Thanks, Pat. We did get our first question, which I could answer, one of you could answer. And that had to do with, is the Ticket to Work program still in existence? Any you want to jump in, or?
Sure, this is Esme. Yeah, it is still in existence. I would say that probably 4 or so years ago, it was probably a much more touted program from the federal level. I think that that now that's something that this administration and this incoming Congress is actually really interested in looking at, is what did we learn from Ticket to Work, and how can we better improve that program. So it's but I would say that it's something that was probably a really hot topic in Washington, at least at the federal level, a number of years ago, and it really has that chatter has really died down. So I think it's important now that this administration and Congress want to revisit programs like that and see, okay, do we reinvest in these? Do we think about them in a different way? But I think that's the direction that we're heading. I would say that employment, I literally just came from a meeting from the director of Medicaid, who said that employment of people with disabilities is a clear directive of this administration. So how that's going to play out, I think we'll see in the next number of years.
Yeah, thank you.
If I might, David, in New York, Ticket to Work is definitely a hot ticket, and I say that on purpose because we have created our New York State employment support system that offers entities to be part of our administrative employment network. It is a data collection process that also then creates opportunity for funding to the state government to continue to create incentives and supports for individuals with disabilities, as well as for the actual agencies themselves not to be overburdened by what was initially written up in a Ticket to Work administrative tasks. And I think that's why it sort of died down, as Esme is saying, is because it was so overburdensome with admin information with no technical support. I mean, I've come to learn that the Social Security Administration still does a lot of things on paper at this time in 2018. To think that a government agency that large is still doing things with paper and pencil blows my mind. But indeed, that is exactly what still happens. And so we need to fix that before we're going to really be successful in anything else. But at least in New York, we've created design, and I know that some other states are exploring with us how to bring that administrative EN kind of component to their state in order to assist the states to win at Ticket to Work for the people that they want to support. So it's kind of neat.
Yeah, it really does take away a lot of the difficulties that were in place when people tried to implement the ticket program, and people would have a ticket and nobody would be doing anything with it. And so I'm glad to hear that from a federal level, they're going to be, looking at that and other initiatives like that. And from, a state level, I just attended a meeting on NIAS and the things that that's able to do that were such impediments to people using the ticket. It's great to see that happening as well. So I'm going to shift a little bit. And I'm wondering how each of you might see managed care having an effect on employment services. And Sarah, if you don't mind, I'll start with you.
Sure. So in Illinois, I'll just start. So we have for our long-term services and supports population, they are only under managed care for medical right now. So just to start with that, from my point of view, and in talking to, our membership, so provider members, as well as other organizations in our state who are also in this space, I think it certainly makes us a little bit nervous, just how, entities who really do focus on the medical, side of things will be able to translate that into the services, the service array that include a service array, I guess, that includes employment and some of the other services that are non-medical that individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities need to support them on a daily basis. So we are sort of working actively with the current, the current administration and the new incoming administration that'll be in place in the next little over a month, just to kind of educate folks on how it has transpired in other states and that kind of stuff. So we are cautiously optimistic that we can, at the very least, at the end of the day, when and if it does come, we will have educated the managed care organizations on, the services and specifically employment for the individuals we serve.
Thanks, Sarah. Pat, how do you see managed care interacting with the world of employment?
Should I be truthful? No, I think that managed care systems understand that the social determinants of employment create capacity for success. I believe that all of that is out there and people are struggling with, okay, so what does that mean? Because we really don't understand how valuable going to work, getting ready for work, getting up and going to work and being employed and being engaged does do for any person, whether they're a person with an intellectual developmental disability or any other challenge that, is created by whatever. But managed care is driven by the bottom line, and managed care is driven by value. So until, we can, as a system, also identify and put real value on that social determinant issue of employment, we're at the whim of the managed care companies who are going to look at the data that is already there for things like diabetes and heart disease and the medical stuff that has forever and a day been kept track of. So I think for us to have an impact with employment being valued by managed care, we had best figure out how to collect some raw data that proves that being engaged in a job, having a job that provides you satisfaction, meets your expectations and your needs, is keeping you healthy. That's our biggest challenge, I think, along with finding companies that are interested in diversifying their workforce. But to have managed care want to value it so that it provides a dollar amount to continue to create the supports that are necessary for people who are challenged by the effects of their whatever their disability is, we're going to have to collect the data. And I don't think we have that yet in a proper way, especially not in New York.
Yeah. Thank you, Pat. That is the way it is really across the country with managed care companies and employment and honestly, residential services and other areas. If you have the data that will show the benefits, you're going to get you'll get funding to move those services forward. It's around data. Esme, did you have some thoughts?
Sure, and I agree on the data piece. I think that is so important. So I mean, I wish I could say that managed care was going to solve the employment crisis that we're facing. I think that it will offer some tools, and I think I think that it's made us think in different ways that could lead us in that direction. So I think that as we've seen managed care enter our space in the IDD field, it's really challenged us to think even more deeply about outcomes, quality measures, et cetera. And I think that that's something we're taking extremely seriously at ANCOR, and something we're extremely involved in. And we know that that CMS is as well. And so I think that is an important step that we've taken. But I think we have to get there regardless of the service system, the type of service system. So I think whether you have integrated care or not, I think we needed to get to that point, and managed care got us there. So employment, as one of these indicators of quality, I think is super important. However, how that's played out in MLTSS in states is really up to how that particular program is administered. We've seen it administered poorly. We've seen it administered well. So I think there's potential there. It's a potentially really positive tool in the employment space, but I think it varies. So, but yeah, so I'll stop there on that.
No, thanks very much. That's very true. It's, a lot of things started at grassroots level, and I know ANCOR had a huge grassroots level to delay EVVs till we understood it a lot better. This is another area where you as providers can really make a major difference in having the right measures in place so that, the right emphasis on services is there. I had just gotten another question, and any one of you who want to jump in on this, go ahead. I know that we could have a whole webinar on this exact topic, so I'll ask that you keep your answer fairly short. But can you talk about the strategies and interventions that could be used with clients who work at a program where they make sub-minimum wage, and how how they can do that work and then translate into, a community job setting? And are there any thoughts you would share with providers who are working with those clients who are going to be making that move?
I would be happy to start that one if you'd like, David.
Please do, Pat. I thought that would be right up your alley.
The work that the New York Alliance, formerly known as the New York State Rehabilitation Association, started about 2 years ago was through some funding that the New York State Office of People with Developmental Disabilities offered us to reevaluate what exactly was being offered to individuals who participated, and I'm using that word on purpose now because we use the word program, and that's what we've seen sheltered workshops be, are the discovery moments, but from the perspective of advocates and some funders have gone on for too long. Yet understand, all of you that are listening to me, that I used to be the director of a sheltered workshop for an Association for Retarded Citizens in our county here in New York, and I believe in them completely, but I also saw that the way in which we were being funded through our state system, there was never an intent for people to do anything different. We were taking care of them, and so our centers became places of complacency and compliance instead of encouragement and career development. And when organizations tried that, the funding, again, that was established for such a thing, pitted the production floor of our workshops, our work centers, against those that were working towards encouraging employment at other companies in the community that the individuals lived in, and that, of course, was being supported through supported employment funds. We shouldn't be working against each other. So in New York, what we finally realized, because of a serendipitous kind of meeting, is that our workshops indeed are manufacturing centers, and some may be small, some may be medium, some may be quite large because of the work that they do using federal, state and federal set-aside contracts. How do we then broach a conversation with the manufacturing industry as our centers being a starting point, a career discovery opportunity towards their world of what they need as a workforce development process? That's the next step, I think, is to look at that. And what we've learned over the course of 2 years is that the manufacturing world knows how to work with people who have learning disabilities, who have indeed behavioral issues, who may not process things exactly the same way as everyone else. Yet they have a bottom line that needs to be met, and they create the opportunity for anyone to work based on the way that they are trained. And so we are now learning about how that works. And that's been going on since World War II, ladies and gentlemen, when they taught the auto industries and all the other manufacturers how to take anyone from wherever they came from to work in their companies. We just need to revisit what was there and get better at it. So that is a big project that's going on here in New York, and I will be sharing more with ANCOR and other trade associations as we move along in this process with the manufacturing industry. But I think that's part of the answer, is to not see it as competition, but to see it actually as a real industry that it needs to be supported, and an inclusive workforce built within it.
Thanks.
And I would just jump in there. I totally agree with Pat. This is Esme. And just speaking, you know, I'm a sister to two siblings, a brother and a sister, both with intellectual and developmental disability. And I've been able to just recently see my sister, you know, go from sub-minimum wage payment in her program to now, and she's in California, to, you know, $15 an hour payment. And so I think there are a lot of interesting, and that was something that wasn't overnight, obviously. So I think that there's a lot of different models to look at as to how agencies are doing that. And I think that part of that, as you move that into the community integration part, is marketing the individual. And then what ANCOR has been really keen on in these discussions is making sure that for individuals who are not going to be able to necessarily achieve the 40-hour work week in the community, making sure that services are always provided for those individuals as the transition occurs. So this is a slow process, but an important transition. And I've been saying this for about a year now, but I see this all coming to be true at the federal level. I really see 14C program under the Fair Labor Standards Act is slowly but surely coming to an end. We're supposed to have a hearing tomorrow up in the House of Representatives in the Education and Workforce Committee on minimum wage, and part of that was going to be dedicated to the 14C program. You have Republicans and Democrats who want to end the program. So I think that this is going to be a discussion that happens not only out of desire to transition, but need to transition, because I do see that transition in the immediate future.
Thanks, Esme. Sir, did you want to add anything, or?
Yeah, the only thing I was just going to add, so in Illinois, we actually had some legislation that was introduced during our spring legislative session to phase out sub-minimum wage. And while the legislation didn't pass, I do think it started some really good and important conversations in the state that have continued in the same fashion, but also in some other ways, in other sort of venues around, not necessarily the phase out, one piece of the phase out, but also how are there ways, and yes, there are, and how do we do it, but the ways to help those agencies who want to begin that process. Where can we find them, peer resources, communities of practice to talk to either other states who have done, phased out sub-minimum wage in those provider organizations, or those within the state of Illinois, because we have had many who have done that over the last, 10, 15 years. And are there resources either through state government or, federal government grants, whatever it is, to help move providers who recognize that is a step that they want to take, and really get that moving. So I'm, while the legislation, like I said, did not move, it really did spark some good conversations that I'm hopeful will end up with some actual movement in the space.
Thank you. And I think you all have touched upon this piece, and it's really around the managing of expectations when individuals start employment or start to move into employment. And Pat, I think you used the word career, and that's really, one of the keys here is that people see certain places as not final landing spots, but as steps along the way, as most everyone knows and has probably gone through this exercise before, is so how many jobs have you had before you landed your current one? And that's sort of, what really rings true here is that, you're going to go through multiple jobs, and
Mm-hmm.
Looking at them from that perspective, I think is important. Esme, I had a quick, go ahead.
David, I just saw somebody say about, well, what about the people that are, there and like what they're doing and they don't want to change? And I said that I would respond to you that is the challenge of the agency that has established the opportunity that, I have members here in New York that have supported a model that would be defined as a workshop for close to 30 years.
Yep.
And they have individuals who have been there for 30 years. No, I don't believe that all of them, even probably a large majority of them, would be successful if we found them a job somewhere other than their job that they see, because we have intermittently and regularly patterned them to believe that what they are doing is absolutely only what they can do. So for me and to all of you, I would say what we do now is we actually teach them about retirement. And we teach them that at 60 years old, it is okay to start thinking about doing something different. And then the organization has the responsibility to assist them towards what that is. And that could still be earning a minimum wage, a less than minimum wage opportunity if that's what they want in the mix of other things. But to only allow or only support one option is not what advocates are asking for, and it's certainly not what the next generation of individuals who are looking to a system to support them in is expecting, nor are their parents and the other support systems that we have thinking that that's the right opportunity. So retirement's not a bad word. We all look forward to it. Why shouldn't they? So
yeah, but Pat, as we talked last week, we're not even close yet. So you and I.
True. Yeah, no, we're not. I got more work to do. We got more work to do.
Esme, I have a quick question for you. Is the hearing still happening tomorrow, or there's been some noise that it might be?
So it's going to be postponed because the federal government's actually not shutting down, but they're doing a holiday. They've declared it. Most agencies declared it a holiday, directed by President Trump to honor passing of President H.W. Bush. And so Congress has also responded by pushing off most of their hearings. But we expect it to be rescheduled really soon, probably next week. And we, we'll keep folks posted in our ANCOR newsletter of that. But if you wanted to keep track of it, it's the Committee on Education and Workforce, and it's the Subcommittee on Workforce Protections. And you can just Google that and monitor the hearings.
Hey,
and watch it live.
Esme, this is Pat. Just back to you. In the conversation, and we can do this offline, I apologize, but just for the purposes, one of my struggles with all of that discussion around the removal or the doing away with a 14C certificate is the fact that both state and federal governments rely on the purchase power that offers to them, and we are already in a massive deficit as it is. Is it really realistic to think that a mechanism by which all states and the federal government purchase would actually consider doing away with that? I know we saw in WIOA extra bells and whistles, appropriately so, put in place so that individuals, the agencies that support individuals using a 14C certificate, are not allowed to misbehave, and I'll put that in quotes, but are indeed giving people choice, more than one, not allowing segregation to be the theme that drives whatever the decisions are, but indeed are really truly creating opportunities for career growth and career discovery and pathways and all that other fancy words that are in there. But you and I can talk offline, but it always reminds me that, this wasn't born out of just because. It was born to create another set of efficiencies for a government, both at a state and a federal level, to meet its bottom line in doing what it needs to do. Otherwise, we still wouldn't be purchasing the way we are, right? So.
Sure. I think that I think you're going to see, and you see this coming from National Council on Disability. You see it coming from Congress, and you'll likely see it from other avenues as well. But certainly a long phase down, but a complete phase down from the program is what the general ask has been. Of Republicans and Democratic officials alike. So I do think that they're going to look at the phase down. With that in mind, I think it's important to remember that, and you know this, Pat, but for the audience, to remember that the 14C program is what makes permissible the payment of sub-minimum wage. It's separate from sheltered workshops. So 14C programs often occur in sheltered workshops, but sheltered workshops are not always 14C programs, because there are sheltered workshops that pay minimum wage and that aren't the full day. So that, for example, someone like my sister, could have that training experience for 2 hours a day, but she's getting, the minimum wage rate. So I think that in my mindset, I think what we might see is that phase down from the sub-minimum wage piece, which will be a challenge for some agencies out there that do depend on that contract and would struggle perhaps to pay the minimum wage rate. But I think we're seeing the move away from the sub-minimum wage portion. I think that you'll see sheltered workshops in many ways remain until those begin to transition as well. So I think there's a multi-part transition that's going to be occurring here. But really important to separate those out. And the focus right now, and I think the agreement right now is at the federal level, is to move away from the sub-minimum piece.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Next question. Pat, I'll start with you. What federal or state initiatives have you seen that may or is having an impact on employment? And I know you shared a little with us about things you've seen in New York, that the NICE program and a couple of other things that are starting to have an impact.
Well, I also think that there's Employment First, a state that has identified itself as interested, following through, acting on, has a governor who really puts his or her energy, and there's quite a few more states other than New York that know and are really working Employment First thoughts, and we should probably look at some of those to kind of strengthen others. But Employment First is indeed a way in which to introduce or continue to introduce what is valued by every New York, any person in the country, and any New Yorker in particular, is the way we look at it. We built here in New York a Inclusive Workforce Alliance. It is a watchdog group that 23 trade organizations, because of course in New York we have more trade organizations than we probably need, but nonetheless we have 23 of many that have joined forces together, both supporting people with and without disabilities seeking work, to say that any New Yorker who wants to go to work should be able to go to work, and we should have laws that are fully supporting that capacity and across the board. So it's a capacity to evolve and to watch what the governor does or doesn't do under their Employment First agenda here in New York. So I do think that Employment First, if treated correctly and with some vim and vigor from a governor, could spell some real success in helping a full integrated workforce be developed in the state.
Thanks, man. Esme, your thought?
I think I definitely would want to put a plug out for Project Search. When I represented DD councils, it was something that that we just saw really good results from, especially for the IDV sector. And it's a really great, when Pat refers to careers, I think that it's a really great pathway to careers. So I love that. It's sort of this idea of interning in your final years of high school, at a hospital, or it can be library. They have one at the Library of Congress here. I think that's a great model. And then the other, and then that places you into a job. I should have ended that. It places you into a job, and you've got career growth, et cetera, built in. So I think that's a great model. And many states have engaged in Project Search, and it's just been a really popular model. I also just wanted to give voice to the 2012-2013 report that was led by Governor Markell of Delaware, which was a blueprint for states on employment of people with disabilities. And Governor Markell was the chair of NGA, of the National Governors Association, and was able to choose any topic. And he chose employment of people with disabilities for his topic. And I think put together this great report for states on how to serve as a model. And they're just great ideas, and they've applied them in states like Wisconsin. When Governor Walker was there, he worked with Governor Markell, so great bipartisan relationship, and saw some real results there and a real state investment in employment within the state. So, it includes making it part of the state workforce development strategy, supporting businesses and incentivizing businesses to employ people with disabilities, and setting the model by hiring more people with disabilities within the state, preparing youth for disabilities for careers, making sure that pipeline is built early, and then, making the best use of limited resources to advance those employment opportunities. And I just think that that's a report, he always spoke about not putting it up on a shelf. And I would just, I think it's still very relevant today, even 5-6 years later. And I'd really encourage people to check out that blueprint.
Thanks. Sarah, your thought?
Yeah, so one, I would absolutely agree with everything that Pat and Esme have said, particularly around the Employment First work. In Illinois, we have benefited from both in the last 5 years. A governor who has wanted to focus on disabilities and one who has not. So we had, buy-in in an executive order, looking at strategic planning, which fell a little bit by the wayside, but we have now, that has been picked up on a smaller scale with like the city of Chicago forming a task force and creating a strategic plan, which clearly in Illinois, Chicago is sort of the hub and the major population center. So, the hope would be that, that is actually being published soon. It's been developed and just hasn't been released, but that, the rest of the state could potentially look at some of the strategies in there as it's being implemented, look to introduce that elsewhere. And then the other piece that the city of Chicago has also focused on is their Chicago Business Leadership Network, which is has really done a nice job of bringing sort of a community of practice of employers together and really focused on individuals with disabilities, and are finally kind of now, over the last couple of years, really getting into the space of intellectual and developmental disabilities where they weren't before. So while I know you said state and federal, I moved it a little bit to local level, but I do think those examples are really important and have really done some great things and will continue to do those.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of good ideas come from the localist of local areas and then expand into, larger areas. And I think all of you touched upon this, but I would just like to add to those people that are, not in the states that Sarah and Pat represent, in the work that Esme does, is that don't undervalue how important it is when you can get coalitions together and talk to politicians, with data, even more powerful. But, normally they have 7, 8, 10 different groups coming at their door with similar requests. But when you guys can come together as a unit and really be pushing something like employment being critical and the work first initiatives, it really makes a difference at both the governing level, but also at the agency level, where people are implementing laws and projects into guidance for you to be following. And it really does make a major impact. So I do encourage you to work with your partners on this and not take this on alone, but try to work. And I know ANCOR has multiple meetings on this to really help folks learn how to, and to negotiate with their local folks as well. So thank you guys for those answers. They were really helpful. So I'm going to ask and Sarah, if you wouldn't mind starting this one, if you could just identify 2 things you'd like to see changed to improve employment outcomes. And they can be local, state, federal, world social values, anything you see. I'd like to hear your thoughts.
All right, I'm going to try my best to keep it to 2.
Yep.
So one of the things that we struggle with in Illinois, and I'm quite certain other states also do, that I think should be noted here, is the restrictions on income for people who live in SILA and people who live in ICFs, and the fact that, as we're talking about sort of educating individuals and getting them excited for and interested in work, and their families included, sometimes we've found, and I should say our providers have found, they sort of run into roadblocks when the families and the individuals learn that they can only take home so much of the money that they're making, that most of it, in our case in Illinois, has to go to the state for rent and just general income restrictions. So I think one, updating and sort of fixing that area is high on my list, and I know many lists here in the state of Illinois, or providers and stakeholders generally. So that would be one. I think the other one is just I would focus on the business side of things, and I know we've talked about it on this call, and everybody knows, but just and I don't know exactly how to say it, but getting the business community, giving them a better understanding of the individuals that we serve and support, and how they can help, like has been said, diversify the workforce, provide really important jobs within their business, and just contribute to their bottom line, contribute to their business, and all of those things. I just, it's a constant struggle, but it's also just a constant education that we certainly work on, that I hope, we can finally get to click on an even broader, nationwide scale, as opposed to, our providers going to local businesses, or even if it's not local businesses, their local chapter of a business, and working on them really hard, if it can be sort of, that aha clicking,
Yep.
moment.
Thank you. Esme? your thought?
Sure. Yeah. So I think there's a couple things that come to mind. I think one is, to Sarah's point, really making sure that businesses are involved in the way that I think can be very productive is better incentivization for businesses. There's a bill that's been introduced by Senator Bob Casey of Pennsylvania. It will die, unfortunately, at the end of this Congress, but he'll reintroduce it in the new year for the 116th Congress. And it's called the Disability Employment Incentives Act. And it's really exactly that. It's a tax credit for businesses that are hiring people with disabilities. And I think that's a really great start. So I want to see more of that. And I love that this bill has been introduced. ANCOR is a lead supporter, and I'd love to see more of this happening. The second thing is really education reform. By the time that service providers begin providing services for a lot of individuals that are transitioning out of the school system, I think that unfortunately a lot of the possibility to really make sure that they have all of the skills that they have the potential to have, I think those opportunities are missed in many ways. And so I think reforming, and we've seen some of these reforms, we're seeing mainstreaming occurring. We're seeing changes to special education courses, but I think it has to happen at an even greater pace, at an even greater rate, and making sure that people with disabilities of all skill levels and abilities are getting the best education that they can, and not sort of just streaming through the system. So, again, back to my family experience on this, I had, a sister who, or have a sister who I think is extremely capable and intelligent. However, she went through 2 rounds of high school. That was really what the education system provided. So essentially was in that for 8 years without a lot of skills training. So I think there's a lot more that can be done at the education level, and the individuals that we begin providing services for can be at a better position to go into the workforce if we can start really, really early.
Yeah, I'd like to really echo that, Esme. I really agree. The education reform is a big one that very often goes unmentioned. Having family member as well, and very intelligent. However, the expectation for him was, he'll graduate and he'll be able to get an entry-level job somewhere, or be able to go to program and have things to do all day. And
right.
That attitude really had to change and has to change. And I'm by way of being upfront here, I'm a sitting board of education president, and struggle with this idea to the education community, because it is foreign for them to think that these individuals can be employed in the community the same way that the other person sitting next to them can, and changing those attitudes and changing those expectations are important. Pat,
Exactly.
Your thoughts?
Well, I'm going to be the change agent here. I disagree with tax incentives. I don't think that, at least in New York, we have asked the question many, many times and find out that unless you're a business that has a major HR department and business setting that can take care of all the paperwork that's necessary to do all the tax incentives, most businesses do not take advantage of them. And they are just, yes, ways to educate a politician perhaps on the value of an inclusive workforce, but it doesn't necessarily translate into really hiring. It may hire, but they don't retain. The issue, I think, is more around setting the expectation for a community to understand that people are people. They come with a set of capacity, and understanding how each of those capacity fits. In Europe, there's a really neat program that we've all heard about, but we don't seem to think, and it's a resurgence that you said what's going on in the national level, and I think that's apprenticeship. Apprenticeship needs to be reevaluated and looked at in respect to how to value it. We don't value middle skills. We don't value hands-on, and yet our kids who cannot work through an education system that is still based on a model from the 1800s of education, which lent itself to only an 8th grade education, and then you went to work on your family farm or you went to work in some industry. We quickly moved into segregating even the gen ed kids into whether they were headed to college or they were headed to work. And how did we emphasize that? We really pretty much changed it. If you were headed to college, then you were, even in the school district got more points from a system. At least that's the way it works in New York. I'm not going to criticize other states because I don't know well enough. But reality is if you're headed for a college education, you must be more important. Meanwhile, try and find a plumber, try and find a carpenter that's worth their muster these days, and you'll have a really hard time. So I think we need to not just focus on the people who identify as someone with a disability and what do they need. I think we as a whole community that includes individuals who are challenged by the effects of their disabilities in revamping what we set as our education standards and our training standards, and help businesses meet their bottom line by actually producing a workforce that can do the work versus incentivizing them to figure out how to change the way they conduct their business to employ people who present because our school system and others have not set expectations for them. Quite often when I was running in charge of the work center that I was in charge of, I kept getting told that we can't make that change because people with intellectual and developmental disabilities have a hard time with change. Forgive me, they do not. They go through it their entire life. They're constantly thrown up against something, some staff person leaving, some rule changing, whatever. It's the people that are designing the supports that have the difficulty with the change. And we need to embrace that and figure out how to work with that. And then anybody, including my own daughter, will be able to, survive whatever we're going to put in front of them. So that's my challenge to all of you, is that we've got to be honest with ourselves about our own expectations, and then we can change the expectations of other people as well.
Thanks, Pat. I'm going to put our 3 panelists on the spot and ask them a question here that they weren't expecting. I have a number of questions from folks, and I'd ask, would you folks mind if I pulled these questions together, sent them to you, and we would be able to answer them offline and send these out to the participants? Because I'm not going to get through all the questions.
Sure. Yeah, of course. Great.
Thank you. I'm going to hit one more and then give you each a minute to wrap up. What are some of the best practices that you see being done with transportation issues, particularly rural issues, but assisting individuals at getting to work that don't have another means of getting to their job? Or if you want to think about it. Okay, go ahead.
No, I'll go first because I'm the most controversial speaker, I think, right now. So how do other people at those companies that are out in the rural areas, how do they do it? Again, we are setting standards or we're starting to have conversations, or we continue to have conversations about how do people with disabilities get to work? Have we explored how everyone without a disability gets to that same job? And why not then create the mechanism to support the individual that has a disability to use the same systems? If we want full inclusion and for people with disabilities to believe that they are truly a part of their community, then they have to be looking and acting and expected to do things the same way. Okay, not all of them will be able to. That's when the system steps in and says, create the accommodation, create the capacity. But to create separate and unique continues to, from my perspective, still have a stamp across their head that says, I'm the person with a disability. I ride on the special bus. I have a coach that shows up because twice a month, in order for them to still be around for me, they have to show up at my place of work. But everybody knows then that I'm a little bit different. And while some might be embracing that, many more may not. And so I challenge us to ask the question first, how does everybody else do it? And then how do we create the accommodation so that I can get to work just like everybody else, whether I have a disability or I don't.
Thanks, Matt. Less controversial than you think, but I'm actually going to ask if we can. I'm going to keep this one on our list of questions to be answered, only because I don't want to run out of time without giving you each a minute to just sort of wrap up your thoughts. Esme, we'll start with your thought, if you don't mind.
Sure, and I can sort of respond to that last one as I wrap up. I think that, ANCOR does two things, I think, really strongly. For one, we learn from what's happening locally and in the state and uplift it to the federal level. And on the same token, we look at, we think really big picture, really, dream big, at the federal level, and then hopefully can move that into the state and local. So it's really cyclical. And so, we look at things, making sure that the funding's there for the current transportation systems, for example. But we're looking at some of the app development being done. There's one in Sarah's region called Scoot that's being developed that to look like Uber and Lyft, right? To help people get to work in other places they need to go. And then at the big picture level, we're looking at autonomous vehicles, self-driving vehicles, and how that plays into disability transportation. So that's just an example of the way that we really function. We're looking at what's happening on the ground, and we're also looking at our dreams in the sky and seeing how we can filter them into the ground. So I think that's really got to be the solution to employment. And we clearly have to have an even greater focus on it than we have in previous years. But we're really at the federal level. Now is the time. This is a great moment, like Sarah said. We have the administration. We have a new Congress coming in. We have folks that are dedicated to this topic, and I think we can make some great strides. So I think we'll do great developments. I think that family members, advocates, and providers will be happy with those developments, and we're going to be doing them in coalition, as David recommended, and as we certainly believe will be the best vehicle to get them done. So thank you for having us, and I also thank the ANCOR members that present on this as well, who really make our work even stronger in DC.
Agreed. Sarah?
Sure. So I will combine some stuff. From Illinois' perspective, we do have a lot of work that's ongoing that I will happily share. Clearly, we will share with ANCOR and to share with everyone around work that we are doing specifically around employment and training, and with, like I mentioned, work ongoing, a new administration coming in. We do have some exciting things on the horizon, and some folks that really do want to focus on this issue area, and just generally developmental disabilities as a whole, which is really exciting. And like I said, we're happy to share that as we maybe aren't currently a best practice state, but we hope to get there at some point soon. And as we hopefully do, we're happy to share our learning, what we've learned, the good, bad, and ugly with everyone, and are excited to hopefully move in that direction in 2019.
Thank you. Pat, a final thought?
Final thought is just that while we're discussing today the lives and the future and the career opportunities for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, that the world of labor is a very broad general place that also has an expectation under the Workforce Innovations Opportunity Act to provide supports to all. And so while we look towards our state agencies that may focus on offering services and funding and supports to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, we need to challenge the world of labor the world of Social Security and the systems that relate to all of that in general, that a person with an intellectual and developmental disability is a person first and will always need a service from somewhere else. I'm reminded of a former president of our Self-Advocacy Association in New York State who once came to me and he said, Pat, I need to talk to you about something. And I'm like, what's the matter, David? He goes, I'm not getting what I need. I said, what do you mean you're not getting what you need? What's going on? My advocacy, boom, big. Oh, what's going on? David's not getting what he needs. Well, David continues to tell me that, and I said, so he says, well, the county that I live in is doing this, 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 and this. And I'm like, okay, and is that what you need? Yes, but why isn't the New York State Office of People with Developmental Disabilities doing that for me? Because the county's doing it for you, David, and you're getting better services. Yeah, but the Office of People with Developmental Disabilities should be doing it for me. So we're not getting that message across too, that they're people first and not just a person with a developmental disability. If the only state entity that gives them supports is the one with the name of their disability, they'll forever be segregated in some capacity if we don't help an integration of state agencies working together. So that's my last hurrah for my final years before I retire, is to figure out ways for everybody to see people first, since that's what we always talk about in person first language. And it's the soul of the work that we do here at the New York Alliance, is person first. So thanks for letting me share my 2 cents.
Thank you all. I really appreciate the three of you, and for your time today, for Grace and Rebecca setting this up and doing all the work behind the scenes. I promise everyone that the questions that did not get answered, we will put together, send them out, and then we'll mail them out to you. If you have some additional ones in the next day or two, feel free to mail them into us. My final words is that I really do believe, and I'm going to echo what Esme was saying, and Sarah and Pat, is that this is a great opportunity right now to push employment the right way, so that people are looking at, for those who can deal with living with careers, to move in that direction, and trade associations and trade jobs. And really, I think part of this is coming together and to really share some of what we learned that's working, and Sarah, some of what is being done that's not working. I think we learn as much from what's not working as we do from what is working in many cases. So I want to thank you. I hope this is not the last of our conversations like this, and wish everyone a great day. And thank you all for your time. I truly do appreciate it. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, David. Thanks, everyone.